We have a quorum, and I'd like to welcome you to the Monday, May 1st, 2017 meeting of the City of Evanston Human Services Committee. Up next is the approval of the minutes of March 6, 2017. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Are there any comments, questions, additions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay, on to items for consideration. Resolution 39R17, designating that portion of Sherman Avenue between Greenleaf Street and Lee Street with the honorary street name signed Donald Baker Way. Parks and Rec and Community Services Board recommend approval of naming the portion of Sherman Avenue between Greenleaf Street and Lee Street with the honorary street name Donald Baker Way. This is for action.
Move approval.
I'll second.
Okay, is there any further discussion, or is this another secret?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a secret or not.
Okay,
think
any
so.
other comments, or, okay.
Is there anybody here? Is there anyone here?
To speak on it?
I was wondering if there was anyone here to speak on it. For Don Baker. Definitely not. Maybe it is a surprise.
Okay,
Extra agenda.
I'm sorry?
I'm just looking for an extra agenda.
Extra agenda.
No. Thank you.
Okay, for Resolution 39R17, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The resolution is, has passed. I obviously have skips and comment. What I'd like to do is have people come up to speak before the item is discussed as an item for consideration. So the next item, I think, is going to be held, Ordinance 39017, amending City Code Title 8, Chapter 5, Sections 1, 3, and 4, definition of weeds. Is that correct? Okay, this item will be held in committee. The next item for consideration, beekeeping application and opposition. Staff recommends approval of application for a beekeeping license. The adjacent neighbor is in opposition. The opposition is due to concerns for a non-adjacent property to the applicant. This is for action. All those, and is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, is there someone here to speak on the bees? Mr. Newman?
Yes, I was the one who applied for the beekeeping permit.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Dan Newman,
Thank you.
and I applied for a beekeeping permit. Didn't expect to have an objection, but I thought it was good for the environment, good for the bees. They're having a little rough time now, and so I hope that it can be passed.
Is there anyone here, staff or resident, to speak in opposition?
There was one letter in the
Yeah.
packet.
Right.
Good evening, Chair Attendum. Yvonne Thomas Smith, Director, Evanston Health and Human Services. So there was a letter submitted in opposition, and when I reached out to the neighbor that opposed, the neighbor explained to me that the opposition was for another neighbor, which is not adjacent to the applicant. And so therefore, based on the language in the ordinance, we recommended to have the license applicant considered because, again, the opposition is not related to an adjacent property to the applicant.
Any other comments? Alderman Ravel.
Well, when we first approved the beekeeping ordinance about 10 years ago, there was no even notification requirement at that time, and I believe the ordinance has functioned very well since then. And when we did add the notification requirement about a year ago, it was in response to concerns about serious medical risks, and we haven't heard about any concerns like that raised in this application, so I think we should go ahead and approve it.
Any other comments? Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. The next 3 items are dealing with police issues, and so I'd like to call speakers here to that are here to talk about the working group and Ms. Decree to speak at this time. Alderman Holmes.
Alderman Mr. Chair, if we could change the agenda a little bit, because since those 3 items, could we skip to those 2 at the end? Because I don't think they will take up a whole lot of time.
Sure.
So that we could not have those people have to stay for a long time.
Okay. Yeah, there's
That would go to
one
8.
person here to speak on coal tar sealants, but no one on rodent. But Mr. Agbo is probably here as well. Is that okay with the rest of the committee?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll skip ahead to items for discussion. The first is banning the use of coal tar sealants. The Evanston Environmental Board recommends that the City of Evanston ban use of coal tar pavement sealers. Is someone here from the Environmental Board to speak to this? Yeah. And anyone else, if you'd like to come up and speak.
There's a citizen comment as well.
Yes.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Elizabeth Kinney. I'm a longtime resident of Evanston and currently the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Evanston. And I'm here tonight to express the League's strong support for the Environment Board's recommendation to the City of Evanston that the city ban the use of coal tar sealant and the sale of coal tar sealant in the city. It is becoming well known that a component of pavement sealants contains a chemical compound that is toxic to aquatic life and a probable human carcinogen. These sealants are applied to asphalt pavements such as driveways and parking lots, in residential, commercial, and university properties to beautify and also to extend the life of the pavement. But vendors recommend reapplication every 1 to 2 or 3 to 5 years. Currently, most pavement sealants used in eastern and midwestern United States are refined coal tar pitch emulsion. Coal tar pitch is the residue left after coal is burned into coke to make in the steel making process. In the western states, asphalt emulsion sealants, which do not contain coal tar, are used. Why do we think that coal tar sealants should be banned? Coal tar sealants contain polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They call them PAHs. Over time, coal tar sealants get worn down through the sun and through driving and through people walking, foot traffic, and they get carried in the homes and schools. The particles get released into the air and washed into the lakes and streams, such as Lake Michigan. These particles, which contain PAHs, are then inhaled, ingested, and absorbed through the skin. Studies show that PAHs are harmful to fish and with prolonged exposure pose a risk of cancer in humans. There is a wealth of published research and governmental reports documenting the presence and concentration of PAHs in coal tar. The U.S. Geological Survey has found that coal tar sealants are a major source of PAHs in the environment, and in areas where coal tar sealants are used, the level of PAHs are 25 times higher, and those living next to the sealant-coated areas, especially children, are at a higher risk of developing cancer. While a statewide ban would be preferable, the League of Women Voters of Illinois has been working without success for 3 years to try to get a statewide ban, and a new bill has been introduced this year by Representative Fine. However, it's not likely that anything is going to happen in Springfield this year, so that is why localities have been stepping up to take action. Fortunately, our Environment Board has looked at the effects of the use of coal tar and is recommending it to the city. While the city itself does not use coal tar sealants, until they are banned, contractors will. Pavement seal coatings that contain much lower levels of PAHs are readily available at comparable prices. Communities around the country and locally have been responding by encouraging the use of healthier alternatives, including asphalt emulsion, sealants, leaving pavements unsealed, or using permeable pavers.
Ms. Kinney, I'll have to ask you to wrap up pretty soon.
Okay. Wilmette passed a ban in February of this year. Winnetka, Highland Park, and South Barrington also banned their use. The states of Washington and Minnesota have also banned the use of coal tar sealants. Major retailers such as Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace, and United Hardware no longer sell coal tar sealants. The League supports the Environment Board's recommendation that Evanston ban the sale and use of coal sealants in the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Next.
don't really have anything to add to that. Just here if you have any questions.
Can you identify yourself?
I'm Chris Kacharzik. I'm a member of the board, the Environment Board.
Okay. We don't really entertain questions during citizen comment, but if we do have questions, we can.
Okay.
Is anyone else here to speak on this issue? Cole?
Oh, Mr. Chair, I move approval.
Yes. Is there a second?
Second.
Are there questions for either of our speakers? Seeing no lights? Ms. Alderman Breville.
So basically, then we'd be directing staff to draft an ordinance.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Okay, those in favor of directing staff for that ordinance indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The recommendation has been approved. The next item is composting and landscape for rodent control guidelines. In July 2016, the Human Services Committee asked the Evanston Environment Board to develop recommendations and guidelines for rodent-resistant composting practices and containers and plantings and fixtures in homeowners' yards as they relate to rat control measures. Is there a presentation? Okay. So we are recommending the acceptance of these guidelines?
So moved.
All those any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. It is approved. Okay, so back to the items regarding the police issues. Is there anyone else? I've noticed some people have come in late. Is there anyone else who would like to sign up to speak as during citizen comment? Okay. The first person on the list is Karen Cartwright, followed by Jean-Marie Fries and Madeline Ducree.
Hi, it's Karen Courtright,
Cartwright.
and I just wanted to, Kimberly will be making a presentation, and I know the packet included both her report as well as the notes that were ably taken by our facilitator, Matt Walsh. During the process, we had 4 meetings. And I just wanted to flesh out a little bit one of the follow-ups, and that is that we had 5 questions put to us as a, quote, framers group to determine how to make a recommendation about how to constitute a working group. And there were as many as 22 or 3 people on some evenings, and then last week I think there were only about 15 of us or so. And while we had addressed all the questions and we had a really good process, there are still some things that need more meaty conversation than you're really able to manage in a large group, and some considerations given. So the group that convened 2 weeks ago, or the meeting before the last meeting, brought up the idea of creating a task force of a smaller group of the people who'd been engaged. And 8 people were nominated from among the participants at the last meeting to form this task force and continue to work and champion the issue as it moves toward the formation of a working group. So I just wanted to fill you all in on a little bit of the rationale and where that idea came from. And there's many people here tonight, and I think a couple others are going to comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. As I'm sure you are all
You
aware.
introduce yourself, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Jean-Marie Friese.
I see. Thank you.
As I'm sure you are all aware, a group of dedicated Evanston residents have been meeting for the last few months in an attempt to come to some kind of consensus on how to move forward with regard to improving the police complaint and oversight process. We met a total of 5 times for about 2 hours each session, give or take. This is not to point out the obvious, but rather to stress that we took the job of answering the 5 questions that were presented to us very seriously. At times, we battled personality clashes, and at times it felt as though we were moving at a snail's pace. But in the end, I am proud of the collective work we did with the aid and assistance of our group facilitator, Matt Walsh, who did an excellent job keeping us on track. And I hope that you will endorse our suggestions on how to move forward. I also want to acknowledge and thank Kim Richardson in her role through all of this. She was given a challenging task. She was faced with a difficult set of circumstances, and that's putting it mildly. But she kept her cool throughout, so thank you, Kim, wherever you are. I'm asking that you continue to support this process. A small task force will coordinate and manage the selection process for the working group, assuming you all agree to that, whose members will be nominated by organizations doing relevant work in the community and will include some seats for non-affiliated community members. We've thought long and hard about the best ways to get the most representative voices into the room together, and this group will and should look like Evanston. In closing, I want to reiterate that the most difficult work lies ahead. However, I do believe that we as a community can accomplish the task of overhauling the current system that many of us feel is insufficient in its present state, but only if we as a city acknowledge the need for change and give this endeavor the resources and the commitment that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ms. Dupree.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, home viewers. You can see us, hear us. Pretty soon, we're going to be able to see you. Okay. I want to say, in my opinion, I believe the Ethics Board for the City of Evanston should be revamped. I think we should change some rules to make it better. And also, to meet more often. Definitely. I want to comment, and the reason why I'm saying this about the Ethics Board is because, in my opinion, I believe that more people on this council should have been under investigation where complaints are concerned. Not only Dolores Holmes, not only Robin Simmons, but other people on this board by their action and their comments. Please don't ask me to name a few, okay? I just hope that the council check themselves because people are listening and they are looking. I'll leave that alone for now. Also, I'm anxious to hear about the citizen complaint working group. I was at the first one, and the other night there was at the second one. Because the board, this group is meeting at a time when there's other things going on. So I guess you have to make a choice. I also would like to comment on the coal tar sealants. I remember there were trucks in my neighborhood. It was Mexican trucks, and they were pouring hot tar, if I'm not mistaken. I think my alderman, who's still my alderman, can comment on that. I think I called just about everyone on this panel. What I want to know is this the stuff that you're talking about that was in my neighborhood, and we're smelling it for hours? Please give me an answer. The next thing I'd like to know is the parks. The children do not know where Twiggs Park is or Butler Park is. The names have not been replaced. Please, let us know when you're going to replace it, council members. The Robert Crown Library. I am very disappointed. I know we have to replace the Robert Crown with the ice skating ring and so forth. One more thing about that while I mention it. Let's have something free, once a week like we used to have, okay, for the children, for them to do something free. Would that hurt us too much? One day out of the week at the beach, one free day, would that hurt us? I mean, would that kill us with the money? One free day. If the dogs can have it, come on. Can't our children have it? One free day a week? Come on. The next thing is the Robert Crown, like I was saying, the library. We have been waiting for our library in the 5th Ward for many, many years. We couldn't afford a North Branch. We couldn't afford a South Branch. But now we can afford, and we barely could afford, the big branch, okay? The big main library. But now we can afford it. Rich people, whatever you want to call it, is donating money.
Mr.
But
Creel,
then I
have to-
read something, I will. Thank you. Now I'm reading about a bond, the city. Are we paying money for this? And we don't have a library right here in the 5th Ward? Something's wrong with this picture, people. I don't want to thank you, Mark Tenham, before you leave us. I want to thank you because you have done a lot for this community, okay? And I thank you. I'll tell you the rest between you and me. Thank you.
I look forward to that. Thank you, Madeline. Next, we have two more speakers, David Salak and Harriet Salak. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Alderman Ted. If I could just respond to something. Ms. Degree, before you leave, she shared a lot, and hopefully eventually we can flush through, but just for those that are listening, I think it's important because our beaches are getting ready to open that, Mr. Creed, so 2 places, beach tokens are distributed through some of our social service agencies. So for those families that are income qualified, they can register for a beach token. In addition to that, residents are able to check out beach tokens at the Evanston Public Library.
I understand that, Mr. Alderman, Peter Braithwaite, but I was talking about not singling out people. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Let's just have a free beach. Rich people, poor people, middle-class people. What's wrong with that? Let's mingle in this little town. If Maryland, and that city, I watched CNN last night, by the way, we're not the best. They are with diversity, okay?
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
So rather than one day, someone can go to the library, check it out, and go every day if they like. But we can talk about this direct.
Well, now you done opened up you done opened up a bag of worms here.
Sure.
It's in your ward, right? Robert?
No,
It's not?
no. It's
Well,
in the
it's in
4th
somebody
ward.
else's ward,
Yeah.
but it's not in the 5th Ward, right?
Are we talking about?
The library over at the Robert Crown?
No. I just was responding to your statement about the beach access.
Yeah, the beach. Robert Crown, free for everyone, one day a week. Is that what we're talking about? No?
No. I was just regarding the beach. I mean, I'll follow up with you after the meeting. I just thought it was very important since
let the people know.
since you brought it up regarding
hear.
access to the beach, that residents who are income qualified can go to the Evanston Public Library, and I think they're available also through a few of our non-for-profit partners to have access to the beach. That was the only comment that I was making. And I said everything else that you shared was very valuable, and hopefully we'll be able to flush it out over the next few meetings.
Okay, I understand. I think I understand where you're coming from, but we can discuss it later. But all I'm saying is that
Forward to it.
free for everyone at a certain time. Or maybe we can't handle that. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. City Manager?
Just to clarify, we do have a free beach day on Mondays from July 3rd to August 28th.
Thank you.
At Clark Street Beach.
Thank you.
And I believe we've done that for several
Thank you.
years, many years.
In addition to, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have two more speakers, citizen comment. David Salak and Margaret Salak.
Good evening. My name is Harriet Salak. I, too, have been at all 5 of the meetings regarding the process of police complaints. I believe you have a report of the meetings in your packet. I think there are a lot of different perspectives on these meetings. Some of the aldermen people have attended some of the meetings. I think there were, the meetings had participation from various people, but a few of the participants did most of the speaking. The meeting started out with a lot of interest and hope of individuals and also people affiliated with various organizations. Ultimately, given how the meetings were organized, the size of the meetings dwindled to the extent that the last meeting, the attendance was reduced to about 12 or 15 people, which then created a subcommittee of 8 to do additional work, actually some of which was not in the purview of what Human Services had specified, and some of the original assignment also was not completed, but left for the subcommittee. Through a lot of arrangements, the breadth of the entire process expanded far beyond the original topics of police complaints and the recommendations for the specific arrangements on how to devise a task force committee. I don't know if some of the committee participants don't trust the competence of the governance of the City of Evanston, whether it's Human Services or the City Council or the city staff. I don't believe that kind of a concern is valid, but obviously some people filtered out and weren't able to come to the rest of the meetings. So the steps of the process, I don't know if it's wait until the number of participants dwindles enough so those who left control the situation, but and then arranging for a subcommittee to complete the work, which the assignment could have been completed in the big meeting, but added work was added into the list. I guess the goal that came out of the consensus of the participants was to select the specific actual members of the task force to rework the police complaint process and do the actual inviting. They're willing to do the work to restructure the police complaint process and address a much wider range of unspecified city issues, which would include doing a lot of education throughout the city. Some people would call it organizing, but we wouldn't want to put that on the city's dime, because there's nothing wrong with the organizing, just not under the auspices of the city. But we may, well, there was a lot of talk at every meeting about diversity, which is important, but in fact, not much apparent diversity was in the outcome. There was extensive discussion about transparency, about how police records, documents, and videos should all be made public access.
Ms. Selleck, I'll ask you to wrap up, please.
Okay, but then there's a special committee spun off to determine who's going to be on the task force to set up the new procedures and to invite them and offer the positions to them. I'll be very quick. I've been a member of CPAC since its inception by the City Council, appointed by the mayor maybe 9 years ago. There's been some fluctuation in membership every year to a change in the police person assigned to answer questions that the members may have during discussions of the issues. The members have always been conscientious in understanding the situation and reasons and options for the very diverse circumstances that arise. Along the way, there have been revisions in procedures. Whenever issues have been raised, they've been addressed promptly, efficiently, and effectively. There are, needless to say, more revisions that are needed to refine the process. Some of them include the City Council changing municipal code. However, I don't think they include removing responsibility from the Human Services Committee and the City Council.
I do need you to wrap up.
Okay, I trust you'll meet the responsibilities for which you and the next group were elected, and two, for which the city government has been hired as responsible caretakers of the city. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your time.
David Selleck, are you speaking? Okay, thank you. That does conclude citizen comment. public. Yes, if you'd like. Anyone else here to speak to police issues can come up and sign in, please. Yes.
Good evening. My name's Betsy Wilson. If I may, I'll sign in after I speak,
Sure.
just to keep things moving.
Okay.
My name's Betsy Wilson. I was very pleased to be a part of the working group discussion as much as I was able. And I'm excited about the energy here in the committee and on the council and in the community to move forward. I just want to highlight one thing about where we currently are in the process that I think is so important, and I'm just so happy to see the commitment to the development of an independent task force. I think with as much as I admire the dedication of the members of CPAC and the other organizations that have been liaisons with the police department, one of the glaring problems that we've discussed over the course of several meetings is they are perceived as beholden to the police department, and they are factually linked to the police department. When the Human Services Committee is responsible for overseeing the police department, were the Human Services Committee also intricately linked to the formation of the task force that would undermine their independence and undermine the perception of their independence. Did that make sense? No, it didn't. What I'm saying is I think it's important, and thank you, Alderman. I think it's important that the task force is seen as independent from the police department. I think it's important that it's perceived that way. I think it's important that it actually is that way. And so one of the factors that's going to be essential to that independence is insulation from the forces of, insulation from the influence of the police department itself, and insulation from the council and the Human Services Committee. Does that make more sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I was really pleased to see in our working group a real strong understanding of the importance of that factor and the commitment to developing an independent police review board. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, Alderman Tendam, I was really excited to see the data coming out of your inquiries. I don't have the math and statistics acumen to fully analyze them all, but I think it's an important first step, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the analysis of that data takes us.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Anna Roosevelt.
I'd like to thank the Human Services Committee and the city staff who arranged basically and made it possible for this group of citizens to keep meeting and discuss this important issue. From my point of view, the meetings went very well. There were some difficult moments, but they got smoothed out, and I felt there was quite a lot of consensus among the members of the group, even though it was rather different each time it met, because people had conflicts with other meetings, even within the city activities. But I felt that essentially the conclusions of the group were pretty much agreeable to everyone. Just one word about independence. Some of us who focused on independence for this community group that's going to be formed to look at policing in Evanston from the point of view of what the community feels it needs, is that some of us who looked into the literature found that citizen review committees that were not independent of the police and of the city government often didn't get anywhere significant in their suggestions for reform for whatever reason. So that was the reason for the importance of independence. Another issue that was somewhat contentious was this issue of what is the mandate of this citizens group that's to be formed to take a look at policing in Evanston. And those of us who were here as basically rabble-rousers in the first meeting of the Human Services Committee that looked at the policing issue recently anyway, we talked about broad issues like does the police, is it effective, and does it do what the citizens would like it to do, or are there things that the citizens would rather it not do and may not be effective? Basically a rather broad view, although there were others of us, not me, but among our group, who felt that the focus should be narrow on citizen complaint processes and that everything broad would come out of that narrow focus. So, but in the end, the focus was allowed to be broad, and I think that's very important. About the subcommittee, finally, many of us could not go to the meeting last Wednesday, which basically selected a subcommittee because we were going to the Harley Clark meeting, which was the same time. And I think some of us would like to keep our hand in who were not selected in that meeting because it was rather a small group of people. And hopefully, of course, these will be open meetings. And so many of us would like to keep our attention on this very important issue. And again, very big thanks to all of you who made this possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burns.
Bobby Burns. I just wanted to say that there's been a lot of different terms thrown around. So task force was, it's really just a group of people that came out of the last meeting who were willing to kind of carry the work forward and to help manage the process. The process mainly would be trying to not necessarily even identify people because, and you'll see in the report, that really was going to be left to community organizations connected to the mental health community, to the homeless community, to social justice agencies. So that wouldn't really be the role of the committee or the task force as it's described in your report. That really would be left to the community to do. And we would just help, again, reach out to folks and just to make sure that that's the folks that were identified met other criteria that we came with, whether those criteria were racial or gender specific or whatnot. I also wanted to say that I can't remember anything that we did in the group that wasn't that didn't have consensus. The last speaker spoke and is right that certain people could not attend every meeting, so that is true. But again, if and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure we made any decision that wasn't consensus. That was actually to Matt Walsh's credit. No matter what we were trying to determine, you put up a number 5 through, I think, 0, which was a fist. 0 was if absolutely you could not, just tolerate the decision that was made. 5 was, absolutely this is great, and then everything else in between was still, that you approved it and you were willing to kind of move on. So even the final committee or task force that you see was done on with a consensus result. So I just wanted to thank Matt Walsh, Kim Richardson, everybody else that was there. It was a very well done and fair process. And I just also wanted to add, nobody on that list nominated themselves to be on this task force or this committee to manage this process moving forward. You were actually told not to nominate yourself, to nominate others in the group, even members of the group that couldn't make it to that meeting. So I just wanted to give some clarity on that. Thank you.
Thank you. One more. Yes, can you sign in, please? Anyone else here if we have 2 more speakers, if you'd sign in, please. You can, I'm sorry. If you'd like to introduce yourself and speak. Thank you.
Hello, my My name is Jackie April Prince, and I just have a brief comment in regard to all these committees and subcommittees and policing the police. I just have the personal belief that there are some agencies that should not be completely transparent, and that is due to the safety of the police themselves, the other agencies that work with them, and for, just the citizens that are involved in any type of crime. I happened to be at a Starbucks, and there was a fight at a McDonald's, and in the newspaper, I think it was Evanston Now, I shouldn't really quote it, the reporter printed out the lady's picture, who was in the fight, who happened to be arrested, printed out her picture, her name, and her address, which I understand is public information. But you don't have all the facts, and you don't know what happened there. And if somebody wants to follow up on that, that's just not a really great thing. So, transparency is okay to a certain extent, and if you have to go to further levels, you do that at a different date and time. But I really don't think that it's the role of citizens to police the police. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see.
Lawrence McCarthy.
McCarthy, thank you.
I'll just quickly say what she said about transparency. It was in the 90s when Chief Kaminsky asked 4 of us to be on the board to look at some of the decisions they were making with the Office of Professional Standards. They wanted independent people to look at it and see if they had any impact on it. And they did ask us if we wanted our names known and could be put in the papers, and we just felt like, well, in a small community, some police don't want people to know where they live, especially if they arrest somebody and someone's near. So we didn't want to be hassled tonight. We said, no, you don't have to put our names in. It doesn't matter. That's part of the transparency that may not be, but that we didn't really care for. But let me just mention about what this committee was all about. There are 4 of us. When I went to the meetings they're talking about, I was at the first meeting, and someone was saying something about a secret committee. And I thought, damn, it's a secret committee we have here? And after about 10 minutes, I realized that was my committee, the committee I was on, only because we didn't have the transparency for someone to say that. It was in the late 90s that I wrote a letter to Chief Kaminsky about how I saw 4 officers deal with a drunkard man behind my building where I had in Asbury and Brummel. 2 uniformed officers came, and this guy was singing, and he was drunk, and he was sitting in a parking lot. And they treated him very well. And then a car came up, and there were 2 plain police officers that told them to leave, and they took over, and they were rather rude. So I wrote a letter to the chief, and I said, I didn't think that was appropriate. And he wrote a letter back to me. He says, thank you very much. He says, I've talked to those 2 officers, and that won't happen again. And then apparently he liked my activism because I was also in charge of a neighborhood watch program. And what he wanted, and with our present chief, they want people on the ground in their neighborhoods who are involved to help them and give them ideas on where we need help. And with Frank Kaminsky, he asked us to come on board because we were on the ground dealing with our neighborhoods. Neighborhood watch, he came on our neighborhood watches. We had walked for 5 or 8, about 8 years, we walked every weekend in our neighborhood. So that's how it happens. Had the faith that we wanted someone to see what we're doing, got some ideas, give them to us. And if you go to a police advisory board meeting with Chief Eddington, he's going to say the same thing that Frank Kaminsky says. Give us your ideas. You got a problem, we want to know it so we can handle it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And that does conclude citizen comment. So back to the agenda items for consideration. HH4, update on municipal prosecution ordinance violation statistics and arrest 2015 through April 12th, 2017, and general expungement information. Yes.
Good evening, Honorable Chair, members of the committee, Alex Mackey with the Law Department. Just updating you on Assistant City Attorney Henry Ford's memo. With this memo update, we updated the statistics to provide the amount of arrests that linked to the ordinance and traffic violations, and those were included in the memorandum. We also discussed the expungement records and how a person would go about expunging a record. I believe there was a question inquiring if the city could do that internally. All expungements are set through the Circuit Court of Cook County and through the state. So it is something that has to be handled within the Circuit Court. Are there any questions?
Questions?
Very interesting.
Thank you.
We did have one point of information. In doing our research and working with the police department was able to pull some additional statistics, and it was just for the 2016 ordinance arrests. For your information, 67 out of the 117 ordinance arrests were in response to a call for the police. So that wasn't included in the memorandum, but it felt important to tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So this is, the Law Department recommends that this committee's acceptance of this update and of prosecution ordinance violation statistics and arrests. All those in favor of acceptance, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The next is HH5, review of police complaints. Staff recommends approval of the review of police complaints. Those are in our packet. Are there any comments or questions regarding those? Did we have a motion and second on the HH4? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So we need a motion to approve HH4.
I'll move item HH4.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
And I'll second.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. It is approved. So review of police complaints. This is for action. Do you have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? I see no lights. Any questions, comments? All those in favor of approval? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is approved. The HH6 item, community feedback for proposed citizen complaint working group. Staff recommends the committee receive the following recommendations developed by community members regarding the creation of a citizen complaint working group following several community meetings. This is for action. Is there a motion to approve, or?
I'll move for discussion.
And second, thank you. Okay, for discussion, is there a presentation of any sorts, or are there questions? Alderman Braithwaite.
Thank you. I do have one question. First, before I get into that, thank you to our city staff and also to the residents who are here representing the much larger group to get us to this point. So there was just one quick, it's on page 169. So the group is recommending 15 to 21 members, and it also, I think, a facilitator to include in the count. So the one concern, and I think you all shared it before, you see how difficult it is to get to consensus with large numbers. And so I also heard from the group, and unfortunately I wasn't at all of your meetings, the challenges that you have when you don't have everyone present. And so if we are to accept this, I would move to reduce that number from 15 to 21, maybe to 10 to 12 maximum, just so that the group will be able to have quorum and be productive in whatever issues they choose to or that are assigned to address, is the one feedback that I have.
Any other comments regarding the same? Alderman Braithwaite's proposal.
Well, I would certainly agree. I would go more like 9 to 12, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And that number in order to have the working group be able to accomplish something in a
Timely fashion.
timely fashion. Well, 6 to 9
Good,
months,
good.
I think, is okay. And
Yeah.
I think we had that in mind in the beginning for the working group. So I think the number is absolutely too large. I was fortunate enough to be able to attend all 4 of the meetings. The last meeting was not on the agenda. It was decided the night of the 4th meeting to have that meeting because they had not finished some of the things. But I have to say that I am impressed that the 5 items that came out of Human Services that they were asked to frame for the working group, they did end up accomplishing, although I think that we could have done that in the second meeting, and that's just where I am. So you did end up where I thought we should have been from the beginning. So the only new piece for me was this new role that I can't wrap my head around yet. But I do understand I think I understand where you're coming from, but I think that that's getting into the work of the working group. I think the working group has to have a chance to do what they're going to do. It's just too many layers, I think. But I really want to congratulate you on ending up with getting those 5 points taken care of. So.
I do think that even a committee of 9 or 10 is fairly large and often takes a lot of work to get a quorum. I do appreciate the variety and the breadth of people from different walks of life that were included in the list, and to be that inclusive, I realize there are some having a smaller number put some constraints, but I think that it certainly the number you're looking forward to, and that is pretty hard to manage in terms of an effective meeting schedule. Alderman Ravel.
Just a minute. Even if we're reducing the number of people to be appointed to the working group to, let's say, 9 to 12 people, each individual member can represent various facets of the community's diversity. So one person could be representing several different interests in perspectives from the community. So I think we could get the diversity that we want or that we need in this committee working group with 9 to 12 people. And also we have very much indicated that these are going to be open meetings, open to the public, and there will certainly be opportunities for public comment and continued involvement from the broader community. So I would certainly endorse the idea of the smaller committee. It just makes it easier to find a meeting date that's going to work for everyone's schedules. And I guess as I see what the task force is charging itself with is really to kind of serve as a nominating committee, basically, just reaching out to the various organizations in the community that they've identified as being likely to bring important perspectives to this process, and then giving these names to City Council. So I don't see any, because Alderman Holmes, you mentioned, I thought you were sort of seeing more into what they were expecting of the task force than that.
Well, I wasn't there, so I didn't hear.
I'm just looking at what we have here on page 169.
I know, I'm looking at page 169 as well.
Right.
And that's but I had looked at it earlier and still could not wrap my head around what this would lead to. I just think that maybe, and I understood from the 4 meetings that they definitely did not want nominations from City Council, from the mayor. I understood all of that, except that the ball is still going to fall back into that arena, and not that I'm advocating that should be how this would be carried out. But I'm just having a little bit of issue with it, that's all. So it's not where I would go.
Alderman Braithwaite.
Thank you, Alderman Tandem. And to maybe follow up on what Alderman Holmes is saying, I was struggling with it also, and I shared this with one of my residents who reached out to me. The normal practice, and I'm going to ask Wally to come forward just to fill in the gaps where I miss out, is I would hope that you would want to see this as a standing committee as from City Council, maybe yes, maybe no. And with most of our committees, that's the mayor's authority to appoint members of the community. And I would assume our new mayor will keep in tradition with our old mayor and making sure that the committee represents what the city of Evanston looks like. So I could see where this committee would make recommendations to the mayor, who's responsible for the appointments, and then you would want, the community who represents these thoughts, would want them to go through an application, would want to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest, and all of that takes place during the process. In addition to that, we create term limits and rules around how this committee meets and who they report up to. So I think to go outside of that, maybe, I don't know if that's what you're wrestling with, Alderman Holmes.
Yeah,
but
because if you go back up, I mean, they've
Right.
already identified the groups.
Right.
And so
Right.
therefore, the groups have already been identified in terms of who they would like to see represented.
Right.
Okay. Right. So, are they looking at the individuals, that kind of thing? I'm just not sure. As I said, I just can't quite wrap my head around it. But I didn't hear the conversation, so I'm not trying to pass judgment on that. And it has nothing to do with the people. It has nothing to do with the people who were nominated to be the committee, so it has nothing to do with that. So it's not personal.
So my reason for calling up the city manager is just to make sure
That we're covered.
that we have clear steps moving forward.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good evening. I think Alderman Braithwaite really outlined how the city of Evanston appoints boards, committees, and task forces. I think the residents who were involved in this process have a different thought. And so since this committee gave them broad latitude to make whatever suggestions they thought were appropriate, they're suggesting coming back to you as an alternate process than what the city's process normally is. So I think it's up to the committee to make whatever recommendations you feel are appropriate to the city council based on what you have in front of you. So if you think this idea of a group making recommendations, I think as Alderman Holmes has mentioned, that those recommendations under the process that we normally have would be going to the mayor. And so if this group of 8 individuals wish to make recommendations to the mayor in some sort of formal way, and the mayor-elect is sitting here, I don't mean to speak for him, my sense is those would be welcome. But again, the task of this group that has met 5 times was to come back to you with recommendations. Your task now as a standing committee of the city council is to make recommendations to the full city council as to how you'd like to proceed. Right. So I think that you have information. I think Alderman Braithwaite's outlined what has been a regular process. If you would like to recommend an alternate process to the full city council, certainly that's within your right to do. But I think when this was originally brought forward, I guess back in February, my sense was that this was a regular committee of the city council that would be appointed by the mayor, and you were just looking for numbers and fixed term and how what the breadth and scope would be. And again, if I may, Mr. Chair, I'm still not quite sure what the breadth and scope is. What has been listed here, talks, I think, in general terms, but I think the question for this committee and ultimately the city council will be what is the specific charge if we're going to move forward and have a working group. So, Mr. Chair, I think if that's something you wish to take on this evening, I think that, if you're going to make a specific recommendation on number of members to the City Council and then a specific recommendation on the time frame, because ultimately that will have to be decided. If you would rather the City Council debate that and leave this as a range, then that's perfectly fine. But ultimately, the finite decisions will have to be made at the City Council.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think to go to the really the core of the issue is the notion of independence, not complete independence, but as one speaker mentioned, the perception and actual independence from what I would call council politics or the police department as direct oversight of this group. So I guess that's what I'm struggling with. How do we let them voice their opinions on, or actually introduce and let us know of other communities where these committees have had independence from council politics, and make a recommendation from there.
And I think the challenge, if I may, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, is that's the end product. I think my understanding of how these discussions have occurred in other communities is that the city councils of other communities have asked residents to come together and have the discussions and then make a recommendation to the city council. Ultimately, the power and authority of whatever group that might be created comes from the city council. The city council may ultimately decide that this is going to be an independently created group. I think in some communities with different state laws than Illinois, they have been done through citizen initiatives. I don't believe that that's available to us here in Illinois. But ultimately, it's the council's decision making. There is no mechanism to create any kind of independent entity without the Evanston City Council. So I think that if it's ultimately the recommendation of the working group back to the city council that it would be an independent group, then that's up then for the full city council to decide. I think that, again, we have 40 some odd boards and commissions. Mayor Tisdale's been very diligent. I'm sure that Mayor-elect Haggerty will be very diligent about making those appointments. And unless this committee tonight feels that that process is not working, my recommendation would be to, look at this framework, make some finite decisions on numbers, and then forward this on to the full city council. Or if you feel you need more time, hold this in committee this evening, and then have it come back at the June Human Services Committee.
I mean, it does seem to me that there are some basic concepts here that aren't clear to me. I mean, it's in terms of next steps, and also I don't know that perhaps I've invested as much time as I could, considering that this is the last Human Services meeting of the council. We could make a lot of decisions tonight that may not meet the expectations of the new mayor and council, or even the next Human Services Committee. Does anyone feel it's worth holding it in committee, or would we prefer to make the one recommendation that I've heard so far, which is the size of the committee, and forward it to council? Alderman Holmes.
Well, if we could just back up a little bit, Alderman Tindem, I think that the 5 tasks that we gave in February have been completed. That's what we asked the group to do. And I think I would not like to pass on junk on to the next council. I think that was our responsibility to do that. I think that piece have been taken care of. So I'm good with that. I do feel that there are, and I keep hearing these playing politics, council politics, that kind of stuff. I'm not even sure what that means, because I've not seen that, and I don't know what that means. I know that I've been on Human Services for the last 12 years. I know that we have made great leaps in terms of really trying to listen to citizens about police complaints and looking at training and everything for the police department. Is it enough? Absolutely not. We all know that. And I think that you'll hear that from the police department as well as from committee members and from staff. But it's much better than where we started out from. I think that we have a system in place with EPAC, CPAC, and as I said it and in February, so I'll say it again, the Human Services Committee is where the buck stops. We can go into executive session at any time to go in depth about any action by the police department. That's very clear. And I asked in February, since there was so much about being independent and having an independent investigator, would it be possible for the Human Services Committee to have such a person. And I believe, City Manager, I don't want to misquote you, I thought you said that would be something that the Human Services Committee could do. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think Chief Eddington later in the agenda has an update on that process as part of the items that we're tracking and reporting back to the committee. So he I know has been working on a request for proposal and is sitting in the back of the room, and you'll cover it later on, Chief Eddington.
Right.
Yes.
So, and all I'm saying to you all is that I think that we have a process that is working. Can it be tweaked? Can it be enhanced? Absolutely. But as far as independence is concerned, I think that we're on our road, and we have another whole avenue that could give us the kind of independence investigation that I've heard people ask about. I know about the training. I feel very confident about that, beginning with Dr. Thompson. I can't remember the year he came. I want to say maybe 11 or 12, I can't remember. But in the last couple of years with Dr. Logan, in terms of our department, moving with that. So I know that we're on a good road, and that's not to say it can't be improved, and I'm not trying to knock anything else out, but I think that we have to look at the good things that it's with our department as well. And I really do appreciate the citizens group that has been appointed by the mayor. There has been disagreement at times, and we see that in the report. We know which groups agree with the position that the police department makes, and those who don't agree or not. So we get a chance to see that and to question it if it is a question for us. So the buck stops right here. And I just not, since we started this barrel of worms, so to speak, I'd like to see us clean it up before, at least for me and Mark anyway, before we get off of the council, that we're not leaving something for somebody else. So I don't not like to see it held.
Anyone else would like to speak? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I think the options before you then are to leave the report as is and forward it on to the full council, to make some additional changes as far as numbers of individuals, length of time, looking at the charge, and then if holding it's not the option, then I guess I would encourage you to, narrow down some of these ranges best that you can this evening, and then we'll forward it to the full council at their first regular meeting on May the 22nd.
My preference would be to set it on as is, if we can.
I would like to make a motion. Yeah, that number's too high. So I would move for page 69, item number 6, numbers of members to be no more than 9, and then strike facilitator not included in the count.
Not more than 9?
Correct.
I would second that.
Second? Okay. Any other comments regarding this amended? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 1.
Who's opposed? You are?
Okay. I think it's, in my opinion, it's premature. Okay. Now for the, so the motion passes as amended.
So now I'll move item H, what are we, HH?
I just want to make clear, though, in terms of that, because this includes the task force, and I'm only talking about the questions. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
The 5 initial.
Yeah, the 5 initial questions with and the number change in terms of the number of recommendations. So we're only voting. That's what I was voting on. I just want to be clear.
The 5, yes, but we are actually going to recommend changing one of their responses in the number of people to be included. Is that correct? That recommendation?
Right. But I'm saying it does not include moving on a task force or establishing a new task force.
I think we're
Select the
accepting,
group.
the motion will be to accept the report is what I think would be the next step. and then it would move to council.
Without a recommendation or with a recommendation?
Without a recommendation of a task force.
That's, well, without what would the recommendation of this committee be to the full city council? So I think what you're saying is.
To ask the five questions that have been answered by them, with the number change being not more than 9, and to establish the working group based upon the number of people that are the group that they have suggested. The only thing that I'm not recommending is the selection of an additional task force to select those people.
So, Mr. Chair, then that would be a motion of, so you're not just accepting the report, you're making a recommendation to the council, as Alderman Holmes just indicated. So that would be something different.
Correct. And that's what I'm struggling with, because on one hand, we are simply referring back to the initial 5 questions as being fulfilled and recommending those go on to council as is, except we are starting to get into the details of what the committee has recommended to us by changing the number of recommended committee members.
By the number, and also accepting the groups that they suggested.
Alderman Holmes, can I make a request then that if there's something within the document before we vote to move it to council that you would like to amend, then you just make the amendment?
And that's what I'm saying, that I want, because I didn't want it to go any farther when I realized that that was not clear to me, and I want to be real clear.
Got it.
That I have no problem if you just go with 1, 2, 3, 4, not 5.
So strike 5, the
6,
membership selection? Okay.
And 7. So striking 5.
Is that a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Can you repeat, I'm sorry, the numbers again?
Accepting 1 through 7 with the exception of 5. Number 5.
Amended 6.
As
And
amended.
amended 6.
Okay, so that is the
That
motion.
is the motion.
The motion.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been motioned and seconded.
You got it? Okay.
I think it's worth just an explanation to the public, again, just so everybody understands. We can go and we can chase our tail around this. I think the goal of the group is to move forward with a committee that can actually look at these issues. And so in order to move forward, we put it in the stream of the other committees that are laid out on the City of Evanston. Everything is transparent. We all understand how we got here with the 3 different committees. Now it was what you did over the last 5 meetings was to make everything transparent and merge it into one group. Out of your committee that meets within the same structure of our other committees, other recommendations can come out of it. We just need a starting point that makes sense based on how we conduct business. So, I mean, if you look at how long it took you just to get to this point, imagine if you were to go on with the same structure. It gets a little bit difficult. So it's our hope that by focusing your group down to 9 members, and you can still make the recommendations to the mayor, that we're able to move forward. So that's my best way of summarizing, at least so you can understand where we are with our vote. And if anyone else wants to add any additional language before or comments before we vote, please do so.
I'm sorry.
Alderman Ravel.
Alderman Ravel.
Well, just to elaborate, I think, on what Alderman Braithwaite is saying, then we would be approving the motion with the amendments that Alderman Holmes has recommended, but basically encouraging those of you who've been part of all these discussions to continue to be part of the process in terms of encouraging people to apply through the regular process we have for looking for citizens who want to be part of whatever the board or commission might be. So reaching out to your contacts in these various organizations that you've identified and encouraging good people to apply, and that would be really very helpful.
I guess I'm opposed to I think we've sort of, on one hand, we're going ahead saying that the 5 criteria were met, but now we're starting to muddy the waters with, approving some and making some strong recommendations about mayoral approval and all that. So I'm really find it hard to accept this and to move it forward.
Alderman Tindem, I take issue with you saying that we're muttering the water, but that is the process. You know, that's the process that all committee members are appointed.
You fill out an application,
Here
and
is
then the mayor
absolutely.
makes his or
And
her
I'm trying
appointments.
to even expand it by saying we want to recommend to the mayor that this group has discussed and want to recommend where people are coming from be accepted. That wasn't even in the 5 questions. So that's expanding that. I was trying to include that. The only thing that I'm saying is they want to be a task force to select that group. And I'm saying that's not what I can vote for. That's all.
Questions, how to select. One of the questions was how to select. That was one of the 5 questions.
Who should select? Not how.
And we said not the mayor, not the city council. That's the whole point.
I mean, yeah, would you like, I'm sorry, point of order here. We really need to move forward with this one way or another.
And they can come to the council.
Yeah, I don't think we have truly resolved this. I think the next council will have other opinions. And I think that, like I said, I thought the whole point behind the working group or the next group was to make these recommendations more concrete.
Well, the working group, absolutely. And this was not the working group.
Right.
That's part of the issue, is
Right.
that they are not the working group.
But it seems like we're doing the work of the working group.
No, we're just creating the parameters for them to operate. I would disagree
That's what we kept trying to tell them,
with
not to
that.
do the work of the working group.
But we're limiting the possibilities that the working group can work with, correct?
I would disagree, Alderman Ten. I think we're just creating the parameters for the working group to move forward.
Which is what we asked them to do, and this is what they've done. I assume that's what they thought they were doing.
Point of order, would we entertain comments from the working group?
From the
committee? Is that?
I would move to open up public comments. We'll do it for 5 minutes.
Okay, if you could select one
30
speaker
seconds, and then we'll
possibly
address it.
to address that issue, those issues, and sort of give us the, for the record, your thoughts.
Line up and come to the mic. 30 seconds. Respectfully.
Thank you. Just briefly, the idea of mentioning different community groups to put forward possible members of the final Citizens Committee, that was to give us an independence and a community, grassroots, bottom-up character to the group. I'm not sure that those of us who are harping on independence, one of which was me, meant therefore that there shouldn't be somewhere in the city process of the elected officials a filtering of people put forward by each citizens group. So I don't know if you get the combination of independence, being people suggested by citizens groups that are relevant to the issue, and then the city committees, human resources, saying, well, we can't have all 25 of these people, we have to have, you know what I mean. So that, I just wanted to mention that. And I guess I myself wasn't involved in the decision that there should be a subcommittee of our group that would choose those people. I'm not sure that if that's to be done, that it would be right for a subcommittee to do that. Maybe why not the whole group? But I still feel that it should be not from us, but from those community groups.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Right.
Hi there, Carol Youngman speaking. So there is a little bit of a misunderstanding about that small group. Basically, the work isn't really done because we don't have a specific recommendation to come forth and say this is the process. But we really thought long and hard about it being an independent process. And so those groups of organizations that are mentioned are representative of some of the organizations that would have people who could represent Evanston. So this little group of 8 were just like wanting to finish creating a process by which to create this working group so that it would be coming from an application process where there would be a lot of representation and questions to consider in terms of who should be on it. So that you end up with a working group that is representative, that has expertise on it, that has a lot of vested interest in it, and that group could actually work. So we weren't going to pick out people, but we were going to set up a process whereby that independence could be assured. Okay. So that's where the confusion comes from. We didn't quite get to the point where we could actually outline the process.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jared Davis. I'm also part of the committee. I just wanted to touch on the point that everyone else kind of summed it up, and I think they corrected part of what was being misunderstood here. But I want to be certain that the point is made that we're not missing the point that what we're trying to do here, because this is a huge undertaking, is we're trying to ensure the independence so that we can ensure accuracy and accountability when we have misconduct. And if you are clearly thinking about it, you can't have that if you're having the body who oversees making the choices for who is going to decide whether or not things are being done right and whether or not transparency. Alderman Holmes, you mentioned that things are being done now, the way they're being done now, you think they're being done fine. Well, I mean, a lot of people would disagree, and that's why we all showed up at the meeting a few months ago to try and jump in and get some changes made to the process to make it a little more transparent, to make it a little more independent, and not necessarily have the city council watching the people that they employ and then reporting back or getting reports shuffling back and forth between people that, you know, it just doesn't work independently like that, and it's not a good look from the citizens' point of view as well. So I just want to be sure that we keep that in the front of our minds here when we're talking about what we're doing.
And Mr. Davis, I really do understand that. And, you know, I know 50 people show up here at the council, but there's still hundreds of other citizens out there that we do hear from.
Absolutely.
So I understand. I hear
Absolutely.
and I hear that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you guys very much. And I want to give my personal thank you for allowing us to be a part of this huge undertaking and try to shape what's going on next in our city with our community and our police partnership, because that's truly what it has to be in order for it to work the way that we want it to. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I just want to say that this process is not a challenge to the work of the Human Services Committee, City Council, any current complaint process, police complaint process. It is absolutely not a challenge to your work and to your service to this community. All we've tried to do throughout this process is, again, create a working group where we can go on and evaluate our current citizens police complaint review process. I believe part of the issue and why there's so much pushback is folks feel like it's a challenge to work that has been done, and that's not the case. What I would ask is, at least can you, again, in order to keep the independency of this group, can you at least recommend these names to the next mayor, thereby he can see if there's any conflict of interest with the names that came out of this independent group? Because again, this group was not ever meant to select the members of the working group. We put that off on this wonderful community who already have wonderful organizations and community groups and different folks who can make that decision for themselves as far as nominate folks. All we wanted to do is we understood this was going to be a lot of work to reach out to all those groups to make sure that every voice was represented as far as the seniors in the mental health community, in the homeless community, in the African American community, Latino community, and all these different communities that we asked the group to nominate certain members. We couldn't nominate ourselves. We just said, hey, look, we all know everybody that's come to these meetings, select people who you believe could carry on this work. Not select anybody, but just carry on the work of managing this process. I would just ask again, just in closing, that you at least again pass those names on, and the next mayor, can decide for himself if he wants to give this group some power to again just manage this process moving forward.
Thank you. Well, the names are part of the report.
Sure.
So they will be passed on.
Yep.
Are there any other comments before I call the question?
So
Seeing none, there's a motion and second on the floor,
Right.
correct?
So then Alderman Holmes, I guess, for the motion that's on the table, if I understand what the group is saying, we can leave item A, 5A, which would just include the names. So that wouldn't be stricken from what would be passed along to council.
I'm sorry. So what do you recommend? I'm
just saying, so if listening to the public comments, that item 5A, the names would be included to the report that would be sent on to council, which would be the new council.
Because you had struck all of 5, correct?
My recommendation and my amendment was to take out 5.
Correct.
I mean, the council sees this packet just like everybody
Correct.
else, so they've already seen the packet and they will see the packet.
Okay.
I have no idea who's going to be on the next Human Services Committee.
Right.
And where that work would come, but that's what my recommendation is number 5 be removed, and number 6 no more than 9. That was what my motion was.
Yes, and it was seconded.
Will you accept a friendly amendment for, you won't? Okay, we'll vote.
Okay. I'm sorry?
You motion and second. Now you have to.
Yes, okay. All those in favor of the report recommendation by community members regarding the creation of a citizen complaint working group indicate by saying aye.
As amended.
As amended, and then referred to council, say aye.
Aye.
I'm voting no against the amendment. So point of information, we're voting we have a report. So just as information, and the amendment is to strike.
No, it's the report as amended.
As amended, with the amendment. Okay, so call it and I'll still be a no. I'm in favor of accepting it, just I would include 5A.
And I'm saying no.
Right, so that's the vote.
So that's it.
What, sorry? Yes, Alderman Ravel.
I mean, including 5A,
It's
it's more than just the names. It says there will be this task force that has this role.
That's why I said I would want to leave item 5A.
So you want to establish a task force? And I'm saying no.
I think
That's
to
what it
leave it
says,
with
Peter.
the names, and then it would move to the next council. I think we'll end up with the same outcome, but what's clear is to have the names reflected as part of the public record is just what I'm advocating for.
Well, then that's a whole different kind of motion. If you would like to recommend that these names be placed as possible representatives for what? That's all I'm asking. Tell me for what. They're going to be read by the council because it'll be in the report. So what is it that you want them to do?
So again, I would, with 6, reduce that number to 9 when it's sent on to council, and then I would leave the names as recommendations to the new mayor. That's it.
For recommendations for what?
I think if I just listen to the public, they just want those names forwarded. It seems like a very simple request.
I think that, we do have a motion.
I get it.
and a second.
Totally get that. There's a total application process. I advocated for that in the beginning.
So
I mean,
if you want to
can.
recommend that those names be forwarded for a application process, that's different. This is for a task force. I mean, it's a purpose in this number 5. Alderman Braithwaite. That's what it says. Are you want to take these names out, recommend that they be sent to the mayor as possible applicants? That's different, and that's what I'm asking you. What do you want done?
The names to appear as a recommendation. That's it.
For what? A recommendation?
For the committee, that would be formed out of this. This still has to go to council, so I'm not trying to do the work. I'm just trying to get this moved along. I don't understand why this is so
I think that it is a matter of record. These names certainly will be before the council and certainly will be a starting point for recommendations regardless of this vote.
Okay.
So I would like to, Alderman Ravel, are you seconding me?
I mean, I don't believe the individuals who are prepared to be on this task force are asking to be appointed to the working group.
That's correct.
They're asking to still have a role in
That
helping.
is correct. That's my understanding as well.
Okay.
So
you want them to continue to have a role in recommending the names to the mayor?
That
Alderman
is
Braithwaite,
correct.
question mark.
That is correct.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, it's still the mayor's decision to appoint, and all the names still have to be approved by city council. I don't understand why we're making this complicated.
Okay. Is there a second to your friendly amendment?
Wait, we still haven't.
Well, there was a friendly, okay.
She didn't accept it.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. I'd like to call the vote. I'm sorry. Are you okay?
No, because we had this motion. It was 2 yes. Alderman Braithwaite said no, and then it stopped.
Okay, so we're revisiting the motion, we're revisiting, we did not complete the vote for so this is the official vote. Yes, this is a do-over, sorry. So with regard to HH6, community feedback proposed of citizen working group, all those in favor to recommend to council with the striking of number 5 and revision in number of participants in item 6, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, I say no. No.
You can count me as an aye. Let's just move
Okay.
forward.
The recommendation will go to council with the amendments. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before you leave the item, I'd like to ask Kimberly Richardson and Deputy Chief Barnes to come up just for a moment. This was even by Evanston standards, a difficult process, and I want to thank publicly both of these fine individuals for the work that they have done. I think I gave them an impossible task, and they still figured it out. But I also want to recognize Matt, and what's Matt's last name? Walsh. Matt Walsh. So if you recall, I guess a couple of months ago now, there was discussion about a moderator, a facilitator. We got various suggestions from various people. I called Eric Witherspoon and I said, Dr. Witherspoon, is there someone on the high school staff who's not a part of any of this but is a good facilitator? And he did not hesitate to identify Mr. Walsh to do this. Mr. Walsh, we had him come in. He was an Evanston resident, has family here, has taught at the high school for a number of years, but was not part of any of this, and he was willing to take this on, so I want to publicly thank him for doing this. We offered him at the end of the process perhaps a stipend or a gift card to thank him for his service. He wanted none of that, but what he wanted was beach passes. So we have provided Mr. Walsh and his family complimentary beach passes for 2017, and thank him for his service to the residents of Evanston, and thank Ms. Richardson and Deputy Chief Barnes for their service as well. Thank you.
That concludes our action items. Now, HH9, Police Department update.
Good evening, Chair, committee members, and staff. I'm Deputy Chief Barnes, and I have this month's Police Issues Work Plan update. Beginning with item number 3, the annual telecommunicators training. The dispatchers completed mental health training and fulfilled that goal. Item number 4, Cook County Sheriff's Department Crisis Intervention Team training. 7 officers have attended this training, and 2 officers are anticipated to attend during May. 1 officer attended the 40-hour NEMR training, which is the Northeast Mobile Regional Training. Item number 5, continued training offered by Dr. Logan. 7 EPD staff and focus groups have been selected starting May 15th. 4 topics have been selected for town hall meetings. The first topic, dealing with race, ethnicity, and community policing in Evanston, is due to start in June. Moving to topic number 7, the dashboard is still pending. Some of the descriptions under that in an effort to increase transparency will include the number of contact cards, the number of traffic stops, the number and type of use of force incidents, and the number of citizen complaints and accommodations. Item number 10, reformatting the presentation of the monthly crime statistic data. Currently, we are auditing our theft numbers due to a change in the Illinois reporting standards for identity theft. As of January 2017, identity theft was made a Part 1 crime. So we are reviewing our data to become in compliance with that. Item number 14, we have discussed the development of issues for a proposed citizen complaint working group. Item number 15, independent investigator for Human Services Committee. Chief Eddington has submitted an RFP for investigative services, which is included in this month's HSC packet. Item number 23, the use of force policy. Adoption of the national consensus policy on the use of force through incorporation in general orders. The revised general order will include department policies on de-escalation. That policy was written, approved, and completed, and it is pending staff dissemination using Lexipol implementation. And Lexipol, once again, is the leading provider of police policy management resources for law enforcement organizations, and it will allow us to track policies, training records, and complaints. Item 24, use of force committee. The creation of Department Use of Force Committee to review all incidents, including officers outside of the chain of command involved in an incident. That's also pending the Lexipol implementation. Item 26, Equity and Empowerment Coordinator. Inclusion of the City Equity and Empowerment Coordinator in the weekly review of the use of force incidents by the City Manager and Corporation Council, and as an ex officio member of the Citizen Police Advisory Committee. That has been completed. And unless anyone has any questions or additional topics they'd like to have me review, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman Tindem, members of the dais. And yes, it is a bad indication when I show up here with a glass of water. We're about to take a serious look at some very complex police data. And part of my responsibility this evening is provide context to that. First, I'd like to extend some thank yous to Chairman Tindem for his questions, to Sarah Jones and Pandora Pratt from the Police Records Department, Commander Dugan and DC Parrott for their assembling of the data, and lastly to Nicola White for her assistance in putting this PowerPoint together. It will be important that you hear from DC Parrott and Commander Dugan tonight on 2 topics that impact on this. It is our DDAX and deployment strategies that will be significant to this evening's conversation. One of the issues that I want to bring up is context is extremely important. The UNC study, which gave rise to Alderman Tindem's question, was a complex multi-state study. And I think that when you take a single data point, it can be misinterpreted or projected in such a way that it does not convey the full picture. And I think that was one of the significant issues in the UNC study. And I want to talk to this, and it's important that we understand the complexity of traffic stop data. This is not my first go-around with traffic stop data. My former employer retained me as the chief of police in Mount Prospect to deal with the Department of Justice when they had similar issues regarding Hispanic drivers. And so the complexity of this issue is great. And I want to get down to the single point of data, a post-stop search. Not all searches are created equal. Some searches are mandated by policy. And so that if you show up at the station with a driver you've arrested for suspended and you mention to your sergeant that you haven't searched him, the next couple minutes are not going to go well for you. On the other hand, and this is one of those rare occasions when you'll hear these words, Illinois has this right. They understood what they wanted to measure and focused on consent searches. And so now, versus the UNC study, it muddies the water, to borrow a phrase from earlier, that you're mixing apples and oranges. The consent search really focuses on an officer's applied discretion versus a search post-arrest incident is mandated. And so when you mix those two together, it can become a confusing data point. I think that further, as you look at this volume of data, it's critical that you look at some other pieces that were in your package. I think, first of all, the report, the 2015 traffic stop report from the state of Illinois is a critical piece of information that you need to be aware of and come to grips with. It is a significant guidepost. And what we've done this evening to further that context is we have selected several communities in the state of Illinois that we are suggesting you look at and compare our data to. And once again, we're collecting data by the same rules. Once again, I have no clue what the rules are in North Carolina for collecting data. I know the other jurisdictions that are included in this evening's slideshow follow the same rules that we do. And so I think that gives some further context to what we're talking about. Additionally, in that Illinois traffic stop study, 1% statewide of all traffic stops ended in consent search. In the city of Evanston, only 1/3% of stops result in a consent search. In Illinois, 44% of the white drivers are ticketed after the stop. 51% of minorities are ticketed statewide as a post-stop. In Evanston, 57% of whites are ticketed after the stop. 38% of minority subjects are ticketed after the stops. And I think that shows that even in the state of Illinois, when we compare ourselves to like data gatherers, there's going to be significant differences based on the way we police in Evanston. The last thing, a couple more points before we start the slides. This is going to be one of those uncomfortable, courageous conversations that everybody talks about, but nobody ever has. The concept that somehow this American concept that everything is passed out on an equal basis, at least in my line of work, just ain't so. If we look at the crimes against persons in the city of Evanston, in 2016, 56% of the victims were African Americans. 61 of the described subjects were described as African Americans. In 2015, 54% of the victims were African Americans, and 59% of the subjects were African Americans. I bring those difficult statistics up only in the context of traffic law enforcement is law enforcement. We are engaged in a violence reduction program that focuses on these events that we are attempting to prevent by driving down the number of victims. I think that you've heard me at other gatherings, other public gatherings, and when we talk about crimes, our focus is the reduction of number of victims. And you can see in saying that we are attempting to reduce the number of African American victims because they are overrepresented in these statistics. With that, we will start and begin to go through this slideshow. This is going to be long. We can attempt to get through the whole thing. One of the things that I want to suggest to you is, based on the complexity of this data, you may need to review it, especially with the multiple documents that you've received this evening. The DDAX summary is important, the entire DDAX report is important, and also the 2015 traffic stop study for the state of Illinois, prepared by Dr. Alex Weiss, is of significance. Also, I'd like to mention that Dr. Weiss has been working on this traffic data since its inception in 2004. He's an Evanstonian and takes these things extremely seriously and is a nationally recognized expert. So I would give that report some weight. It is significant in interpreting this extremely complex traffic data subject. With that, are there any questions that I can field before we start the review of this data? Commander Dugan, if you could get to the first.
Just before you get started, Chief, to members of the committee, has everyone had an opportunity to flip through the 130 pages? Okay. That'll give you an idea of
is there any pages? Is there any pages you would prefer that we focus on? Because I'm about to make watching paint dry look exciting.
I think if out of a respect for time,
perhaps not, depending on if we can get the slideshow back up.
If everyone in the committee's had an opportunity to look at the 130 pages, the only statement that I want to make is it's unfortunate that so many members of this collective group have left to miss this. And so for those that are here, this is where the work begins, and half your group just walked out the door. So if you want to pull up the slides, I know that I had identified a couple of slides, and this may help us to move through it. I think,
you know, Chief, when you and I reviewed the slides the first time, I think we went through at a fairly good pace. Yes. I don't think it was extended much long, maybe 45 minutes.
Or so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a possibility, because the fact is that it's a lot of information that will take a long time to digest and to apply to our circumstances. And I think if you just go through at a good pace, and when there are questions, we can ask questions, and just keep the ball rolling that way. I think we can get through most of it.
Okay, and this has all been based on the rash assumption that the slideshow will work.
Okay. And while we're waiting, I would like to say thank you for this presentation. The amount of information, the depth of information that you collected is truly outstanding, and it was a lot of work, but I think it's, like I said, I think it will be a good reference guide to a lot of questions we have about neighborhood and other, the way we conduct police business in this town, comparing it to other communities of similar nature. And like you said, this is the way we do business in Illinois, and this is the way we do business in Evanston, and that is a combination of both your policies and what the council agrees, and and how we work with you as well. So thank you for all this information.
Thank you, Alderman. I would like to again reemphasize the contributions to Sarah Jones and Pandora Pratt in assembling this information, because this was a custom report. This is not the way we usually measure data, but I think it is quite instructive as we work through this. So one of the first questions was the number of stops each year. We're up about 1,000 stops between 15 and 16. Go ahead, Joe. Here's a breakdown of who by race is getting stopped. in the city of Evanston. Go ahead, Joe. And again, for the difference between 2015 and 2016 is infinitesimal. Of those stops, how many were for safety violations? And go on to the next slide, and we'll see how that's broken down. Once again, the primary reason for our stops are moving violations, those traffic violations, and only a small percentage are what we label as investigatory stops. And it's, again, reflected pretty much the same percentages between 15 and 16. For each category of stop, how many resulted in the driver, passengers, or the vehicle they were riding in being searched? Here's the search data. There were 777 total searches in 15 in 2 and 938 in 16. For each category of stop, how many times was the driver white, black, or brown? And here's a breakdown of those divisions. And please go on to 16, Joe. Thank you. Those remain relatively consistent over time. Equipment violations is also a topic that comes up quite often, and you will see that our equipment violations are relatively steady from year to year. Same thing with registration violations. Both of those areas of violations there's always a concern that they will fall more on people below the poverty line than above it. And so that's one reason why those are reviewed. Investigatory stops is a reflection of our crime suppression efforts, especially in the area of violent crime against persons. For each search, how many times was the driver or passenger white, black, or brown? Here's that breakdown over both those years. And those, once again, in the context of the efforts we're engaging in, the suppression of violent crime plays a part in how this search data comes out. By consent searches, and I want to call your attention to the the low number of consent searches in the city of Evanston, especially compared to the statewide numbers that you'll see in the traffic stop report. Pretty much the same thing in 2016, consent versus probable cause. Want to indicate the positive steps that have been taken over the years. If you go to the next slide, Joe. One of the things that has really changed the dynamics of consent searches in the city of Evanston is Mayor Tisdall's agreement with the ACLU back in 2008 or 9 regarding how we would define a consent search, or what the ground rules for an Evanston police officer asking for a consent search. Now, it is legal in the United States and in the state of Illinois. If I stop your car for any reason, I can ask you, do you mind if I look in your car? Okay, once again, many concerns on that. Is it a coercive situation? How coercive is the situation? People not being aware that they can have the right to refuse makes that a very nebulous area for police work. Early on in her tenure, Mayor Tisdall received the concerns of the ACLU, and in her conversations with the ACLU, the standard was established for the Evanston Police Department that we would only ask for a consent search based on reasonable, articulable suspicion. We have to be able to say why we want to look in a car. The officer has to be to explain that to his supervisors of why this search was justified under that standard. And so I think that is a huge difference than many Illinois police departments. I think especially if you look at the other agencies we've collected data from, that you will see that I think there's only 3 that are even close to where we're at. Most of them are many in the hundreds exceeding what we're doing. I also want to speak to the data collection efforts that you're seeing the results of tonight. We collect the data so we can discuss it in this detail. The training by Dr. Logan is significant in this effort to bring balance to how we police. Additionally, the in-car video review process is of significance. The supervisors are mandated to review 4 traffic stops per officer per month. This is a random selection of stops, and so it's not only a complaint basis that we're evaluating our work, it comes from these supervisors reviewing what the individual's officer is doing, regardless of whether there's been a citizen complaint or not. And also, frankly, the complaint process is one that is, I realize, under review, and anything can be reviewed, but it has been our standard for quite some time that all complaints are taken and none are disposed of at the desk sergeant level. All complaints are recorded and put through the system. What is the mean number of traffic stops for the city of Evanston? The mean number in 2015 was 1502, and the mean number in 2016 was 1649. Which beats or precincts had more than the mean number of stops in 2015 and 2016? In 15, these 4 beats exceeded the number of stops, and also for those wanting to look online or view at home, the beats don't exactly align with wards, but there is a beat map as part of this package, so you can see what exactly we're talking about. In 2016, these 5 beats exceeded the mean in the number of stops. How many of these stops were for safety violations and how many were investigatory? Here's a breakdown of this: moving violations, equipment violation, registration, investigative stops, and crashes. And that's broken down by the beat 71 through 78. Next slide, Joe. Reason for stop by police beat is again depicted in this bar chart. And so once again, moving violations are the most significant reason that you're being stopped by the police. For each precinct or beat, where were the number of stops in excess of the mean? Is there evidence that the crime rate in the neighborhood fell from the prior year, and if so, by how much? These next charts depict the uniform crime reports by beat, and you will see a reduction in all beats over between 15 and 16. I think beat 78 was the only one that was flat, where there was no change. Number of legal guns and traffic stops. Both those years are the total number of stops. Go on to the next slide, Joe, please. Illegal guns that were recovered as a result of traffic stops last year. How many stops resulted in a post-search stop? How many resulted in a seizure of the firearm? Of the illegal guns that were recovered as a result of traffic stops last year, were the guns discovered through post-stop search in every case where illegal firearms are seized, or were there some of those firearms visible in plain sight before any search was indicated? Of the illegal guns that were recovered as a result of traffic stops last year, in the cases where firearms were seized, were suspects known to the police before the stop occurred? And if so, could the search have been conducted by some other means, such as by securing a warrant for the subject's last known residence? Here's the data that we believe answers those questions. And while you're digesting that, let me speak to the last part of that question regarding the ability to obtain warrants for residents. There's a significant body of case law in the United States that carves out significant exceptions for search of motor vehicles based on their mobility. The courts realize that once we release the car, if there's any evidence in there, it's most likely lost forever. Additionally, that translates into the terms of a lower expectation of privacy in your vehicle versus your home because of the mobility of the vehicle. Consequently, we're able to search vehicles with a much lower level threshold of the information we need to search. Additionally, just because we see someone out and about with a firearm, or we see someone on social media displaying a firearm, the courts are somewhat reluctant to provide warrants just on that small piece of information, especially for the search of a home. And so long story short, we have a great deal of latitude in searching cars, especially when we're have reasonable articulable suspicion that there may be weapons in the automobile. Also, during those searches, other contraband was found, and here's a list of those.
Chief, can you just please
certainly
go back to the last slide?
Certainly.
So the number of guns located so in 2016, a total of 9?
No, sir.
Okay,
that
I
entire
may
column.
not be reading this information correctly.
No, it's that the total would be at the entire column. It would be 18 for that year.
So 18 in 2016, and then 2, 4, 10. Okay. Well,
Excuse me, 1,000 searches and 18 guns found? Did I mistake something?
Yes, please look at the rest of the slides, and if you take a minute to look at the entire slideshow in its totality, you'll see that other items are located during these searches that are also for the illegal at the time of the search. Next slide, Joe. Go ahead, the next slide, Joe. I think this is a summary that will be somewhat instructive in compiling all that data. Also, as you look through this online, there's indexes that you can go back to that if you prefer this information in a chart or in a table rather than a chart or a graph, that information, the raw data is there in that format if you'd like. Is the data available showing crimes from the communities that studied post lower stop ratios in the city of Evanston? This is significant in that please take a look at the communities we selected. Please take a look at their information, because I think this comparison is significant to evaluating our efforts in the city of Evanston. This talks about consent searches, and I said earlier that this is a direct quote from the 2015 traffic stop report, is that, once again, all searches aren't created equal. Consent searches are of significance because it is a display of the officer's discretion rather than whether the officer did or did not follow procedure. It shows that in 2015, consent stops were up substantially in Illinois. That, once again, is not the case in the city of Evanston. This paragraph is of import this evening that we're looking at now. In fact, in 2015, only 36 agencies, about 4% of the participating Illinois agencies, performed 100 or more vehicle consent searches. Interestingly, these 36 agencies accounted for 53% of all the vehicle consent searches conducted in the state. Agencies we include in consent search data for all agencies, and readers should take great care in drawing conclusion when an agency has fewer than 50 consent searches per year. IDOT only accepts complete data. I think if we could hold on for a second, Joe, one of the things I would ask you to do is take a look at that 2015 document and look at the agencies that are engaged in 53% of those searches. By their policies, they have decided that consent searches are an appropriate law enforcement tool to be used rather broadly. The city of Evanston has decided otherwise, and that's why there's a significant difference in these outcomes. Okay, Joe, if you go on to the next slide. This is the first slide where we begin to compare ourselves to these other jurisdictions. These are Illinois jurisdictions, and once again, we confine ourselves to Illinois because they're collecting the data by the same rules as we are. I think as you go through these other jurisdictions, it will be insightful into what the differences in the styles of policing, even among these Illinois agencies. And I don't believe any of these agencies were on the list for the departments that were responsible for 53% of the consent searches. And I think as you go through this, you'll have a sense of whether or not you feel the data is comparable. And once again, we break down the consent search data and other things because, once again, I think as the traffic stop study says, that's a display of where the most discretion occurs. Keep going, Joe. And let me see. Do we know communities with post-stop search data ratios are closer to the national average and reject the geomapping methodology that Evanston and Chicago uses? And if so, do we know what impact they have had on the decisions and their crime rates over time? We list the crime rates, and then, Joe, if you can get to the slide where we talk to their deployment strategies, and if you could come up and say a few words about our deployment, because our deployment system, I think, is significantly more robust and well thought out and focuses on specifics rather than generalities. Commander Dugan.
All right. Good evening, members of the Human Services Committee. My name is Commander Joe Dugan. Thank you for having me up to speak about the Evanston Police Department deployment process. Each week, we have a deployment meeting where the command staff from each unit and each shift get together and meet to address recent crime trends in an intelligence-led and data-driven manner in order to effectively deploy resources for the upcoming week. The meetings start out with a crime analyst. She presents maps with the previous week's crime that happened. It shows crime patterns and highlights other major incidents, shots fired. It also highlights incidents such as traffic accidents. The crime analyst also talks about vetted intelligence that came in through the previous week. This intelligence comes in through crime reports, through calls for service, through the community. We get a lot of information from elected officials, text-to-tip, social media, other police agencies, confidential informants, all that type of stuff. It's all provided and discussed at the meeting. Next, each shift goes through what they did for the previous week. They talk about their successes. They talk about some of the challenges that they had, and they also talk about some of the problems that they tried to address that might need to keep going, that keep working at for the previous upcoming week. Based on all that information, the representative of each shift decides on what they're going to do for the upcoming week in order to address the problems and crimes, pattern crimes and incidents that are going on so that they could effectively deploy their personnel to the proper areas. This includes the DDAX information that Deputy Chief Parrott's going to talk about next. This whole process, as part of the deployment process where they do that, ensures that every unit, every shift is taking ownership for the crimes and that are going on and the quality of life issues in the city and in their respective tour of duty. All of the crime maps, the intelligence information, and the plan for the upcoming week is then packaged by the crime analyst and put out to every sworn officer in the department, and it's also discussed at various shifts and roll calls. This ensures that each officer is front-loaded with current, relevant, and vetted intelligence of specific individuals that are involved in specific crimes here in the city of Evanston and ongoing conflicts and other quality of life issues. Having this information in the officer's toolkit is very important, and it provides a good foundation of information on these specific incidents and individuals that are involved in ongoing criminal activity that officers might come across during a tour of duty, whether it's on a call or even during a traffic stop or some other type of investigation. This intelligence-led information also helps officers prevent future crimes, especially when it comes to, say, crimes of some type of retaliation. If we have some incident where one side of a conflict is either battered or shot at or something like that, the officer knows when they get there who a possible offender might be, and also where some retaliation might take place, so we could provide some extra patrols in that area and possibly stop a future crime from occurring. All this information is very beneficial to the officers that have. It's up to date, it's relevant, and on these specific individuals and their criminal activity. We're very proud of our successful intelligence-led and data-driven deployment process, and the improvement for the quality of life of the residents that it brings. We try to showcase as much as we can, whether it's at community meetings. We have on our police department webpage, and we also have a internet periodical that goes out weekly called In the Squad Room that highlights the deployment process and summarizes our weekly deployment. It goes out every week. We have over 3,000 subscribers, so that's very good. We're always looking for more. But so in closing, that's pretty much our deployment process. Thanks for your time, and thank you.
Good evening, Committee Chair, Alderman, and city officials on the Human Services Committee. I'm Deputy Chief Parrott. I'm here to talk a little bit about DDAX and what that is and how we use it at the Evanston Police Department. DDAX stands for Data-Driven Approaches to Crime and Traffic Safety. Excuse me. We've incorporated that into our deployment process. It's a supported program by the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and the National Institute of Justice. It's also endorsed by the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. What we do at the deployment meeting is our crime analyst overlays maps of traffic crashes, both injury and non-injury crashes that occur on the roadway, so we can look at that and implement looking at where crime is occurring and also where traffic crashes are occurring, and we can use our resources to do traffic enforcement in those areas and hopefully reduce crime if there's an overlay, and also reduce traffic crashes. Each week, the command staff, when we meet at the deployment meeting, each unit discusses their availability to address the different accidents that occur and how they occur by beat and also by shift. Since motor vehicles are a component of a lot of criminal offenses that include burglary, robbery, shootings, and theft, the use of selective traffic enforcement in those areas as they overlay for crime and traffic crashes can reduce criminal offenses. As we talked about earlier, we want to reduce victimization from crime, but part of that victimization is also if you are injured in a traffic crash. They're victims also, because those crashes can be prevented, and the best way to prevent those is through traffic enforcement. Some data I'd like to talk about. Through the DDAX application, the vast majority of traffic stops are for moving violations, and moving violation offenses, when they're stopped by the police, have a direct impact of reducing accidents. That's found to be the best approach. As we don't write everybody tickets that we stop, we do address the violation. In looking at traffic stops, there was a notable increase from 2015 to 2016 in regards to traffic stops. They went up by about 1,000 to 1,200. There's also a correlation in that we looked at roadway accidents that occurred from 2014 and 2015. There was also an increase in traffic crashes that occurred on the roadway too. So our goal is to minimize, and we have had, looking at some of the data, not only motor vehicle crashes, but also accidents that involve motor vehicles and pedestrians and pedicyclists. For 2015, we had 54 pedestrians involved in accidents and 79 pedicyclists. So we're trying to ensure safety throughout the Evanston community, not only with criminal offenses, but also reducing accidents that involve pedestrians, making it a bike-friendly city. We want to address, obviously, reduce accidents that involve bicyclists and motor vehicles. Is there any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, DC. Mr. Chairman, this concludes our presentation. Are there any slides you'd like me to go back to, or any questions that I can field or my staff can field from the committee?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, Chief, if you just do a right click on that file and then download it to the desktop. It'll allow us to flip through the slides a lot quicker. Go to Save As. Scroll down. Yep. Back up. There you go. So while he's pulling that up, I just want to go back to your opening remarks and to a number that we received at a Fifth Ward meeting with Alderman Holmes. And so before we got into the topic of stop and frisk, there was a very detailed presentation that I think identified maybe, and I could be making this number up, Alderman Holmes, keep me honest, maybe about 50 potential gang members, just from the top of my head. Does that sound correct? Or maybe I'll go back to the chief.
No, we've done several presentations, and that number sounds reasonable.
Reasonable, okay. And so as we, go through this data, I keep that number in mind, that if we were to do a sum total of all the air quote bad guys who have the potential to shoot or conduct that's my working number, okay? Fair enough. So I want to start at number 17, page number 17. And what gets a little bit confusing and gray to me, maybe go back, yeah. So we have 61 or 6,100 is the number of whites versus the 37 number of blacks that results in the number of stops. And so I can't do the math in my head. When I look at that, I think about the total population of residents, and then I would want to take that number out and look at the percentage, right? So if we have over 80,000 residents, what percentage of those residents are whites, and then look at the same percentage versus black. But the one thing I can do is, and you've added that up in a previous slide, is if I add up the people of color, so the blacks, Asians, Hispanics, we get a much closer number of, looking at 2015, 61 to 58. So you add up the people of color, and you get 5,879 versus 79, or versus the 6144 whites. So it's right about, give or take, simple math, 50%. And the reason that I ask that, or the reason that I'm making that comparison, is because myself looking at this data, I still can support the perception that's not only the city of Evanston and what we've heard nationwide is that overall the black community by percentage is still over-policed versus our white counterparts. And so if I look at walking through the slides, page 25. Yeah. Let's go flip to page 29. So now we're looking at the investigator. Thank you, it's late, thank you. And so can you just give me a definition of that so I understand what that encompasses, just a brief description? You said it before, just.
The officer has perceived a situation where he believes there's a crime been committed, and he is stopping the vehicle pursuant to that.
Okay. And then on page 31, we see again a very large number. The numbers now flip-flop. And out of that control group, you're showing that over, 3 to 4 times blacks are now being searched more than the whites, even though there are more whites that are being pulled over. And I guess I'm trying to understand now why the total number of whites, again, you get a larger number, but then when it comes to the searches, we're up to 579, with that being the top number. And then in your last slide, and I think this is where the young lady, where you were going with it, because I had the same question, And out of all those stops, you were only, and I don't mean only, let me strike that, because I think anytime you get any gun, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or in this case in 2015 it was 10, and in 2016 it was 18, are all very important to the whole city. But do you see where
Yes.
I'm having some confusion, and it's real difficult for me to connect the dots?
I would say it's not confusion, it's concern, Alderman.
Okay, thank you.
And I appreciate that. Commander Dugan, if you could go to the victim and suspect slide, please, I'd appreciate it. One of the things that is part of this difficult conversation is that when we say we want to do this all math-based, crime is not distributed that way. Also, when we talk about hit rates for searches, I'm not sure what standard we want to use. Do we have to bat 300 so we get into the Hall of Fame? Does our quarterback rating have to be above 100? This is a different set of circumstances, and I think that if we place an arbitrary number on this, if you have to be this successful so much of the time, I'm not sure that considers the complexity of what we're undertaking. And so I think that one of the ways that I hope to put this in a more reasonable context and make it less incendiary is the realization that as we break down this population, and that being the population of the city of Evanston, African Americans are overrepresented as victims and offenders in crime. And so I think our job is to suppress crime. And so if we're going to suppress crime, shouldn't we be dealing with the people involved in those events that are defined as criminal? And so I think that until the demographics of victims and offenders changes, I don't think our stop data or our search rates are going to change. And frankly, sir, this is the difficult part of this conversation.
Right. No, and trust me, I appreciate it. So from a public standpoint, and for those of us who are black and have black children and so on and so forth, I have to challenge this data because I look at the larger number. And so when I look at 5,000 stops versus 50 gang members, that still seems a little bit high. And
I'm sorry.
And so how we got here, right? Because this has been going on. So this is a great conversation. These are excellent numbers to look at. Is within this last year, we've had 2-3 very highly visible stops that I still maintain are outside our community standards, whether it was Devon Reed, the Northwestern student that was pulled over, and the young lady, again, that was pulled over by the officers that were consequently they were disciplined. So those are the concerns that I have. There's no one of us would trade a shooting, but here we are with these really lopsided numbers that I just have to state my concern.
And we are listening, and one of the issues that the city of Evanston has worked on over time is, and this is going back decades to Chief Logan, to work to diversify the police force, to include men and women of color that are involved in the creation of these numbers. And so there's a multi-pronged approach to making sure this is being done correctly. The internal reviews that are done, the reviewing of the videotape, all those are checks and balances by us on us. And so I think that we welcome this scrutiny. We want to tell you and the public what we're engaged in and how we're going about doing it. And yes, have we made mistakes in the last year? Absolutely. To think that we can do this error-free it's not possible. It's not possible. I think the issue is, do we address the errors when they're made, and do we react to them and take corrective action? I think that even with the 27-point plan that has been put forward by the city manager and myself, I think you can see that there's an attention to detail in those issues that is continuing. And so as we grapple with these numbers, I think one of the things that I would like to do is step back and talk about what the entire city is doing to more balance those numbers. Success in school, cradle to career. Our truancy ordinance that we passed a number of years ago. We've never arrested anybody for truancy. We're much more focused on getting the child the help to stay in school. So we're looking at the precursors to these police interactions and attempting to create an environment citywide that maximizes the probability of success for young people and minimizes the probability of their interaction with the criminal justice system.
Are there other questions for the chief?
Just to be clear, I want to, when we passed the stop and frisk, Alderman Braithwaite, and talked about the 50-odd people that we knew could be targeted, that didn't eliminate that there were other folk who may be involved in other activities, drug selling, whatever. So that number, so if when you start to compare the numbers, and I hear what you're saying, that number would certainly increase, not just gang members that we knew were coming out of prison, have been in, whatever. So that number increases, that's all I'm saying, in terms of overall stops, if that's what you're trying to compare it with. And I think one of the things that the chief is alluding to is the hard conversation that we all have to have in terms of owning our own parts in our community that where crime might exist. Some of those stops may be the same person over and over again. I mean, I'm not saying that, but I would imagine that would be, a scenario that I had a discussion with someone and I thought, that's a great idea. It just might be. So that those numbers increase. I know that I read in the paper somewhere about in Illinois, they're trying, I think it's a bill that they're looking at in terms of, or in Chicago, I believe it is, that you could be picked up because you were associated with a gang member, and they're trying now to change that. And I think it was City of Chicago, I'm not sure, but I know I just read that, I think sometime over the weekend or late last week, that because people who live in different neighborhoods, and you have relatives, you have people who have had issues, and so you may be in the company of someone who might have a record, who might be tagged as a gang member or a drug dealer, and that you would be picked up just because you're associated with them. At least I don't think we have that in our community, but I believe that is in the city of Chicago currently.
Yes, and they're reviewing the state statute that
Yes.
directs it. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, to go back to Alderman Braithwaite, one of the things that I would request that you take a look at is the estimated minority driving population numbers that are included in these charts. I think that lends itself to a description, to putting the traffic stop figures more in line, and it addresses your concern, because I think that one of the things that happens is we start off with this perception of census data, and the census data isn't the driving population. Those are two entirely different things. So I think that if you look at that, that's articulated in the traffic stop report, and it's also depicted in these slides. And so that number changes from our resident population, our census. Our estimated minority driving population is an entirely different number.
Okay.
And I believe that our Evanston estimated minority driving population is 47.5%. And so that a dramatic shift in from what our census is. And that's based on who the state of Illinois estimates is driving in the city of Evanston.
That's a large percentage, yeah. With the population.
Are there other questions? Seeing no lights, I assume we have finished with the presentation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your time and attention and the opportunity to walk through this difficult and complex topic. Please, members of the dais, my staff and I are available to discuss this further with you. I realize this was an avalanche of data displayed in multiple different ways, and I believe just as the continuing conversations about independent police review will continue, I think conversations regarding what these numbers mean and how to interpret them will continue. And again, I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item for communication. Is there a presentation or comments on Evanston Police Department Canvas citation report for the first quarter? It is in our packet. Okay. With that, that is our business for this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you.